Let your eyes grow heavy and your mind drift into the distant haze of time. Far away from the buzzing world of today lies a land of marble columns, sandals on cobblestones, and the faint rustle of togas in the summer wind. This is ancient Rome. Yes, not the glorious Rome of Julius Caesar's speeches or the roaring battles of legionnaires, but the sleepy, overlooked corners of Roman law and punishment. The truly bizarre, the quietly strange. The kind of stories most history books forget. And tonight, we'll start with a whisper. You see, Rome was not only a place of grandeur and glory, but also a city obsessed with control. Control of the body, the mind, and even of sound. In the early days of the Republic, long before the emperors rose in golden chariots, silence was not merely polite. It was enforced. In certain sacred places, temples, bathhouses, courts, silence was not just expected, but demanded. And if a citizen broke this sacred quiet with an ill-timed whisper or the creak of leather sandals, the consequences could be strangely specific. One such punishment, recorded by a minor legal clerk whose name history has long since misplaced, was the binding of the tongue with wool. Yes, wool. If someone spoke out a turn in a temple or uttered a forbidden phrase during a sacred ceremony, they could be sentenced to walk the forum for a full day, with their tongue wrapped in freshly woven wool, a quiet warning to others, and a rather itchy one for the offender. The idea was not to harm, at least not physically, but to embarrass, to shame, and most importantly, to silence. And so, imagine a Roman citizen, head bowed, tongue bound in wool, silently trudging past merchants selling dates and olives, past philosophers debating fate and destiny, and even past hungry street dogs that paid him no mind. No one would dare speak to him. To acknowledge the punished was to risk suspicion. And in ancient Rome, suspicion was almost as dangerous as guilt. This punishment may sound amusing or even harmless, but in Rome, the subtle was often more terrifying than the severe. To be marked as one who disturbed sacred silence was to be seen as unclean, impure, even dangerous. Some believed such people attracted bad omens, and neighbors might start avoiding them long after the wool was removed. A simple whisper could ruin a reputation. But what if the tongue continued to defy order? Then came another strange invention, one that appears in only a few fading records etched into wax tablets. The voice cage. Crafted of fine bronze wires, this odd contraption was placed over the mouth and fastened around the head. It didn't stop someone from breathing or eating, but it muffled their voice completely. Imagine a gentle cage, shaped like a mask, delicate yet humiliating. The punishment was usually reserved for gossips and rumor spreaders, especially women of the upper class, whose chatter was said to cause disturbances among the lesser minds. It's fascinating and a bit cruel. The Romans saw words as dangerous. A whispered rumor could spark rebellion. A joke could weaken morale. Even poetry, especially poetry, was watched closely. Satirical poets often ended up exiled, or worse. Their books burned in the forum, while the authors were forced to watch in silence. Now, picture the city at dusk. The reddish gold light bathing the rooftops of the Subura, the noise of the market finally dimming, and the gentle splash of water in the public fountains. Somewhere, under this sleepy sky, someone walks with a voice cage around their face. Their footsteps echo quietly as they pass taverns where the wine flows freely and the laughter rises, though they can only watch in still silence. Rome, in its strange glory, was a place where even the invisible, like a whisper, could be punished with visible shame. Of course, not all punishments were so gentle. Some were designed not just to silence, but to transform, to reshape the offender into a walking warning, a cautionary tale made flesh. But we'll get to those soon. For now, let your mind wander down a cobbled street, dimly lit by flickering oil lamps. Let the warmth of sleep settle into your bones as the night watchman strolls past, his sandals soft on stone. He doesn't speak. No one does. Because in ancient Rome, silence was survival. And you, dear listener, have made it safely through the first corner of this bizarre world. There are 9 more chapters to come. But tonight, rest easy. You've just begun a journey through the strangest shadows of the eternal city. Sleep well. We'll pick up again when the moon rises over the Roman rooftops. Now that the hush of Rome has settled over your thoughts, and the wool has been gently removed from our poor speaker's tongue, let us tiptoe a bit deeper into the peculiar punishments that shape the daily rhythms of the ancient Roman world. Perhaps you've heard the old saying, to make an ass of oneself. In ancient Rome, this was not just a figure of speech. There was a punishment, documented in the scattered writings of satirists and scribes, known as the donkey step. It was a punishment not for violent crimes or theft, but for arrogance, particularly among the lower magistrates and petty officials who overstepped their duties. When a low-ranking bureaucrat insulted a senator or enforced an edict too harshly, he might be sentenced to walk the length of the Forum Romanum backwards. Not just backwards, but bent over, mimicking the 4-legged gait of a donkey. His robes would be lifted slightly to make the resemblance painfully obvious, and small bells were sometimes tied to his ankles to draw even more attention. It was absurd, uncomfortable, and designed to grind down pride without shedding a single drop of blood. Imagine the scene. A bustling square, people pausing to watch a grown man, respected only yesterday, now reduced to crawling in humiliating slow motion, each jingle of the bells announcing his shame. Children laughed. Merchants chuckled behind their carts, philosophers whispered to one another, and the man walked on. But Rome didn't just punish with humiliation, it punished with artistry. Let's shift now to the peculiar punishment reserved for those accused of minor theft, particularly the stealing of public goods. Grain, olive oil, or even firewood. For these offenses, a surprisingly creative sentence might be passed. The living mosaic. Offenders would be taken to a public plaza and using colored dusts and chalks, officials would draw around their body an outline on the stone floor. The criminal was then made to lie within the shape, perfectly still, for as long as the judge decreed, often hours. Bystanders would walk past, see the chalky figure lying in shame, and sometimes toss bits of spoiled fruit or stale bread onto the artwork. No chains, no bars, just the weight of public laughter and stillness. This punishment was meant to make the thief part of the public space he had stolen from. Quite literally, a part of the city floor, a living reminder. And when he was finally allowed to stand, the outline remained behind, a fading ghost. By now, you may be wondering why so many Roman punishments were theatrical rather than violent. It's a fair question. Though Rome is famous for its brutality, the gladiators, the crucifixions, the catapults, many everyday punishments were less about pain and more about performance. Because reputation in Rome was everything. Your name, your status, your place in the endless pecking order of Roman life. It could all be undone by a single embarrassing afternoon. And so punishments were often crafted with care, not just to correct behavior, but to display it, like a warning sign made of flesh and movement. Tonight, as the moon rises a little higher over the 7 hills, you can still imagine the quiet clink of ankle bells echoing off marble columns. The faint outline of a man still etched in the plaza stone, perhaps even a dusty patch of wool tossed aside in a temple corner. The Romans are gone, but their odd inventions of shame and silence still whisper to us, don't they? Let those whispers lull you now into a deeper sleep, where time slows and the stones of the past cool gently beneath your thoughts. You've survived the first strange chapter. The journey is just beginning. Close your eyes. The Forum is quiet now. Drift with me now into the second chapter of our journey. The night deepens. The stars above the Tiber glow faintly, and the streets of Rome begin to exhale the warmth of the day. We return once again, not to the Colosseum, not to the battlefield, but to the quieter, stranger spaces where justice wore the robe of ritual, and crime was met with the oddest forms of penance. Our story begins not with a man, but with a goose. Yes, a goose. The Romans held sacred many things, temples, laws, and order. But among the most oddly revered creatures in all of Rome were the sacred geese of Juno, kept within the temple on the Capitoline Hill. These birds, according to Roman legend, once saved the city from a stealthy invasion by honking wildly at the approach of Gallic soldiers under the cover of darkness. Since then, they were seen as divine sentinels, never to be harmed, always to be honored. So, what happened when a citizen harmed a goose? There was a punishment for that too. Strange and ceremonial, as all Roman punishments tended to be. If someone was found guilty of disturbing or frightening the sacred geese, whether by accident or mischief, they were sentenced to a feather trial. The accused was made to stand in the Forum covered in goose feathers, which were gently glued to their arms and face with a paste of honey and act. They were not to speak, only stand, eyes forward, while the priest read the tale of the sacred geese aloud. It was not painful. It was not cruel. But it was deeply awkward. Romans walked by. They smirked. Children pointed. Some offered crumbs. The accused would remain in feathers until the sun began to set. When, at last, they were permitted to wash in the Tiber and quietly return home, forever marked in memory as the one who angered the birds. It was a soft punishment, but it lived long in memory. You see, Roman punishments had a peculiar sense of theater. A crime against a bird could become a public ritual. A soft touch of embarrassment could weigh heavier than iron chains. But feathers were not always funny. In more rural provinces, especially in Etruscan-influenced regions near modern-day Tuscany, a variation of this punishment was known as the weight of wings. It was given to those who spread lies or rumors that caused unrest in the countryside. The accused would be brought to a town square, draped in a cloak of bird feathers, often dyed in bright, garish colors, and asked to walk in slow circles for the length of a single water clock's measure, around 1 hour. Feathers would swirl around them in the breeze, kicked up by the dust, as the townspeople watched in silence. No one jeered. It was not festive. It was a solemn warning, as if to say, words carry weight, even if they seem light. And yet, despite all of this, the Romans still believed in redemption. If the accused completed the sentence without complaint, they were often offered a soft loaf of bread and a small clay goose figurine to carry home. A reminder, and perhaps a small comfort. Tonight, as the cool air rises from the riverbanks and the lamps flicker low, picture the strange sight of feathers swirling in the Roman wind. A gentle man standing still beneath temple columns, silent, soft, humbled not by whip or chain, but by the watchful memory of geese. There are worse ways to serve justice, perhaps. Let this image settle in your mind now. A warm breeze, the fading light of the forum, a cloak of feathers brushing softly against stone. You're safe here, in this sleepy corner of forgotten history. Breathe deeply. The strangest punishments are still to come. As we return once more to the shaded edges of Roman memory, let your breath slow and your mind wander again. The feathers have drifted away. The honey has been washed clean by the Tiber's slow current, and we arrive now at a quieter corner of justice, one not etched in marble, but whispered on the winds of rumor. Rome was a city of voices. Orators stood on stone platforms, merchants shouted their wares, children played with songs in the alleyways. But not all voices were welcome, and not all words were safe. There existed in ancient Rome a strange fear, the fear of the cursed name. Romans believed that to utter certain names aloud could draw misfortune, illness, or worse. And when someone was accused of speaking such a name, be it of a disgraced family, a forgotten god, or an enemy of the state, there was a peculiar ritual designed not only to punish, but to purify. It was called the whisper trial. The accused would be brought into a small chamber beneath a temple, usually one not open to the public, deep in the foundation stones of Rome's oldest shrines. There, in the dim glow of an oil lamp, they would sit before a silent priestess known only as the listener. No chains, no accusations shouted, just stillness. The accused was told to repeat the words they had been heard speaking, the cursed name, the dangerous phrase, slowly, softly, as if speaking into a well. If the listener nodded, if she believed the whisper sincere, then the punishment was not painful, but strange. The speaker would be forbidden from using that name again and given a small clay tablet inscribed with a seal. The seal was not to be broken, not even on pain of death. And the accused was told to bury the tablet in a hidden place, beneath a bridge, near a grave, or under a fig tree. The belief was that the act of burying the word erased its power. It was not punishment in the way we understand it, but more like a ritual of balance, of resetting what had been disturbed. But if the listener found the whisper mocking or defiant, if the speaker smirked or stumbled or refused to say the name at all, they might be sentenced to a more visible fate, the Night of Echoes. This punishment required the accused to remain awake from sunset to sunrise, walking a set path through the city, repeating their own name with every step. Not the cursed name, their own, again and again. No one was to speak to them. No food was given, no rest, just the endless rhythm of their own voice echoing off stone wall. I am Marcus. I am Marcus. I am Marcus. Until the sky began to pale and the birds stirred in the fig trees once more. The idea, the Romans believed, was that repetition would clear the echo of the dangerous words they had spoken. That by hearing themselves say their own name again and again, they would forget the name they never should have said. Strange, isn't it? But Rome believed in the power of names. Some were revered, others feared, and the punishment for misusing them was a curious mix of silence and repetition, of whispers and echoes. So tonight, as your eyelids grow heavier and your thoughts begin to quiet, imagine the soft tread of sandals on midnight stone. One voice, over and over, like a lullaby meant only for the ears of the city itself. I am Julia. I am Julia. The sun will rise soon over the Tiber, washing these memories away. But for now, you rest. You've wandered through another chapter of curious justice. No need to whisper, just sleep. Let your eyes grow heavier now, as we move deeper into the quiet folds of forgotten justice. Rome lies still beneath a blanket of stars. The lamps have dimmed. The streets, once alive with voices, now hum with the gentle hush of dreams. And in this silence, another curious story stirs. One that begins not with a sword or scroll, but with a scent. The Romans, as you might know, loved perfume. The air of the baths was filled with the fragrant oils of myrrh and rose, and wealthy citizens wore exotic scents imported from Egypt, Greece, and even farther east. Fragrance was a sign of wealth, of status, and of taste. But, like all things in Rome, it could also be weaponized. There was a curious form of punishment, seldom mentioned in major texts, but noted in a few fading inscriptions and gossip-filled letters among the Roman elite. It was called suffusio odoris, or the drenching of smell. It was not a punishment for murder or betrayal. No, this was reserved for more delicate crimes. Vanity, false humility, or mocking the gods through excessive luxury. For example, if a citizen, particularly a woman, was found to have worn forbidden perfumes into a temple or anointed herself with oils considered too sacred for casual use, the penalty was simple, strange, and unforgettable. She would be brought to a public square and anointed, not with sacred myrrh or costly jasmine, but with an overwhelming concoction of sharp, sour, and vulgar oils. Garlic mashed with vinegar, rotten figs left in the sun, oils infused with crushed fish bones. All of it mixed into a paste and smeared onto the skin, a cloak of scent, not painful, not scarring, but unmistakable. The woman would then be walked through the marketplace, accompanied by 2 silent guards, while passers-by covered their noses and stepped aside. This punishment turned the beauty of perfume on its head. It was a reminder that even scent had rules. Even fragrance had boundaries. Interestingly, the Romans didn't just invent this idea as a form of mockery. They believed that smell was moral. A good citizen had a clean scent. A dishonorable one could be sensed, literally, in the air. So, imagine a noble woman, once draped in silks, now walking slowly through the stalls of fruit and bread, covered in the sharp sting of vinegar and garlic oil. Her eyes downcast, her dignity melting with every step. But this strange justice didn't end there. In some cases, a scented offender might be given what was called a fragrance exile. Not a real exile. She wouldn't be sent away from Rome, but she would be forbidden from using any perfume, oil, or bath scent for 30 days. It was a symbolic stripping of luxury, a quiet shadow of shame. And in the heat of Roman summer, with its dust and sweat and smoke, that silence of scent could feel louder than any public scolding. Of course, men were not exempt. A young senator who wore too much foreign musk to impress at a banquet could also be sentenced. His punishment? A bath in sour goat milk followed by a march past the Senate House. One poet described the scent as a warning to the nose as much as to the heart. It was, once again, Rome's curious way of turning something elegant into something corrective. And yet, when the sentence was complete, when the skin was washed clean in the river, and the last traces of garlic oil faded from the robes, the offender was considered restored. They had walked the path of scent. They had paid their aromatic dues. Now, as the stars turn above the eternal city, and the night breeze moves softly through the fig trees, you can almost catch a hint of those strange oils on the air. Sharp, bitter, forgotten. Like a whisper from the past, sleep deeper now. Let the scent of history drift quietly from your thoughts. The night is far from over, and stranger punishments still lie ahead. As the scent of strange oils fades from the Roman wind, and the night grows softer still, we move to another corner of Rome's curious justice, one that focused not on the body's pain, nor its scent, but its symbol: hair. In ancient Rome, hair was more than vanity. It was a language of status, of virtue, of control. A senator's clipped curls, a matron's carefully coiled braids, a slave's cropped crown. Even the simplest cut held meaning. And so, when someone stepped outside their role, their rank, or their place in society, it was not uncommon for punishment to come in the form of a blade, not a sword, but a pair of shears. There existed a little-known class of officials called the tonsores judiciari, the judgment barbers. These were not your everyday hairdressers. They were servants of the court, summoned only for special penalties. When a Roman citizen was judged to have disgraced their role by lying about their station, impersonating a magistrate, or violating laws of modesty, the court would summon the judgment shears. The accused would be brought to a small stage in a public square. There, with quiet ceremony, the tonsor would begin to cut. Not all the hair, but just enough. A noblewoman's braids undone, a merchant's beard unevenly shorn, a soldier's proud top knot reduced to tufts. Always just enough to be noticed, always deliberately unattractive. And then they were sent back into the city, marked not by chains or stamps, but by awkward angles and jagged strands. A walking message. This one forgot who they were. It may seem gentle, a haircut, a shave. But in Rome, where appearance was identity, it was deeply unsettling. Some criminals were said to hide for days afterward, ashamed to be seen. Others wore cloaks until their hair grew back, hoping time would erase the lines of judgment carved across their scalp. But it didn't stop there. In rare and particularly dramatic cases, usually involving high-status women caught in scandal, the punishment escalated into what was called capillum obscurum, or the darkening of the hair. A mixture of pitch, soot, and oil was brushed through the hair, turning golden locks into a dull, sticky black. This was believed to reflect a blackened soul, and it often lingered for weeks, difficult to remove. Some historians believe this punishment had roots in older Etruscan rituals, where darkening the hair symbolized mourning, shame, or the casting away of purity. In Rome, it became a silent rebuke, a warning without words. Yet even these punishments had endings. Once the shame period passed, usually a lunar cycle, the punished were free to return to their usual grooming. Hair regrew, color faded, and just like that, the judgment dissolved into memory. So now, imagine the early Roman morning. The sun just beginning to rise over the rooftops. A man sits near the edge of a fountain, touching the rough cut of his beard, watching his reflection ripple in the water. a woman brushes her darkened hair, hoping the pitch has faded. Life moves forward. But the lesson lingers. And you, dear listener, drift ever deeper into the calm shadows of history. No shears, no shame. Just the gentle comb of time brushing softly across your thoughts. Let sleep come now. Rome will keep its secrets a little longer. As the quiet rhythm of ancient Rome hums gently in your thoughts, we walk now into a subtler kind of punishment. One that doesn't shout or sting, one that doesn't spill a drop of blood. Instead, it whispers beneath the feet of the guilty. In Rome, what you wore on your feet mattered. Sandals weren't just shoes, they were declarations. A senator wore red-strapped calce, tightly bound in leather and polished with care. Soldiers wore sturdy boots, thick-soled and nailed for marching. Slaves went barefoot or wore thin, worn-down soles. And among the lower classes, the wrong sandal could mark you as bold, arrogant, or, worse, dishonest. It was this obsession with social symbols that led to a punishment known in hushed terms as the barefoot march. The crime: impersonation. If a man was caught wearing the shoes of a higher rank, be it a magistrate's red leather, a priest's ceremonial white, or a general's heavy marchers, he would not be whipped or jailed. He would simply be stripped of his shoes and ordered to walk the entire Via Sacra, the most sacred street in Rome, barefoot and silent. No guard followed. No chains were needed, because everyone who saw a man barefoot on the Via Sacra during daylight knew he had pretended to be someone he was not. The stones of that street were hot in summer and cold in the Roman winter. They were uneven, worn, and lined with the dust of centuries. It was not the pain that made the punishment effective. It was the eyes, the murmurs, the quiet knowledge among passers-by. This man walked unshod not because he was poor, but because he had lied. In some cases, the offender was made to carry his stolen shoes, dangling from his belt like a confession. Other times, a wooden placard was hung around the neck with the Latin word mendax, liar. There were even women punished similarly for wearing shoes deemed too extravagant for their station. High-soled sandals of the upper class were forbidden to those below a certain rank. If worn improperly, they too could be made to walk the temple steps barefoot, and with hair undone, a mark of symbolic unraveling. But Rome, being Rome, took the symbolism even further. In one curious case recorded by a local scribe, a merchant who falsely claimed to be a senator's cousin wore not only forbidden sandals, but a senator's sash as well. For this, he was sentenced to wear 2 left shoes, a mismatched pair made of different colors and sizes, and to walk in circles within the marketplace for 1 hour at dawn. The punishment was called the ambulatio inversa, the reversed walk. A strange image, a man stumbling in left shoes, walking in loops, while merchants set up their stalls and early risers watched with mild amusement. The message was clear: you have walked the wrong path. Now, walk again, but crooked. These quiet rituals were designed not to draw crowds or outrage. Instead, they slipped into the rhythms of daily life, noticeable only to those who understood their meaning. And that, perhaps, made them more powerful. Because in Rome, disgrace didn't always come with a shout. Sometimes it came with soft sandals, or the absence of them. So as you rest, imagine the gentle clop of bare feet against ancient stone, the hush of early morning in the forum, a man walking with his gaze down, his pride bruised, but his body unharmed. Sleep comes quietly, like sandals against a temple floor. Let it find you now, as we pause once more in the shadow of Roman law. Now that we've walked barefoot through the sacred way, let us sit down, gently, slowly, as the Romans once did, upon something called the Sella Quietus, or chair of quiet. But don't get too comfortable, because in ancient Rome, even the act of sitting could be punishment. You see, the Romans were not fond of laziness, especially in the lower classes. Industry, movement, and duty were prized, while idleness was considered suspicious, even dangerous. Too much rest meant time to think, time to doubt. And so, for those who were caught pretending to be working, particularly state employees who napped during their hours of duty, a curious penalty awaited. It began with observation. A clerk who drifted off at his station, a guard who closed his eyes too long in the shade, a messenger who lingered in a courtyard. If reported, they could be sentenced not with labor, but with enforced stillness. The chair of quiet was a large wooden seat placed in the center of a busy square, often the Macellum or marketplace. The offender was made to sit upright in this chair for the full length of the workday. 8 hours. No leaning, no speaking, no food, no books, just sitting. It sounds easy. It wasn't. Because the Romans didn't see the chair as rest. They saw it as exposure. The chair faced outwards. Its back was tall, flat, and plain, and it sat slightly elevated, making the sitter visible to all. And in that position, the message was clear. This one has wasted time. So now time wastes him. The punishment didn't hurt, but the stillness grew heavier with every hour. The sun moved across the sky. The market hummed and faded, and the person in the chair of quiet remained unmoving, thinking, sweating, watching. Occasionally, pranksters would whisper questions to the seated one, but speaking was forbidden. Even scratching one's nose could earn a scolding. It was not a rest, but a burden of enforced presence. Worse still was the nap confession scroll. If the person had fallen asleep on duty and denied it, they would be handed a scroll to copy by hand while seated, a confession written by a city magistrate. It read something like, "I, a servant of the people, have dishonored the clock of duty by surrendering to dreams. In stillness, I learn the weight of stolen time." They would copy this again and again until the scroll was full. But not all punishments were public. In elite households, where private tutors and scribes often worked long hours, sleep was more tempting. Some masters created their own version of the nap punishment. A soft cushion embroidered with the words vigilantia, wakefulness. The sleepy servant would be made to carry it tucked under one arm for a full day. It looked like a privilege. It was not. It was a sign to all that the one carrying the pillow had once misused its comfort. Strange, isn't it? In a world where brutality was often celebrated, Rome reserved some of its cleverest punishments for the subtle sins. A sandal, a scent, a seat, each one a symbol, each one a story. And now, dear listener, as you gently recline in your own seat, free from judgment or audience, know that your rest is safe. Your stillness is not a sentence, but a sanctuary. The chair of quiet is empty tonight. Let it remain so. Sleep well. Rome can wait. Let the soft breath of ancient kitchens drift into your thoughts now. Warm bread baking in clay ovens, pots of lentils simmering beside garden herbs, the faint sweetness of honey cakes cooling in the shade. Rome, for all its grand architecture and military might, was also a city of appetites. And with appetite came judgment. To eat too much, too quickly, or too lavishly was not merely frowned upon. It could become a matter of law, especially for those who held public office or served the temple. Because in Rome, moderation was virtue, excess was weakness, and those who let their stomachs speak louder than their discipline sometimes found themselves before the judgment seat. One of the more peculiar punishments for this was known as the cochlear longum, the long spoon. This strange object was not a tool of torture, but a performance of restraint. It was a spoon nearly 2 feet long, with a shallow bowl at the end. Those accused of gluttony, usually elite men caught overindulging at public banquets, were sentenced to eat exclusively with the long spoon in their own home for several weeks. They were to use no other utensil. What made it strange wasn't the punishment itself, but that the rule was enforced by their household. Servants were told to remove all normal spoons. Friends who visited were expected to mock them gently for the awkward device. And so, for days or even weeks, the glutton would try to balance soup, honey, or porridge on the end of this ridiculous, trembling stick. Every meal a reminder, every bite a quiet scolding. But public gluttony received a more theatrical response. One such punishment, mentioned in a dusty scroll of comedic speeches, was the banquet of shame. Here's how it worked. A wealthy man, usually a politician or magistrate, was accused of wasting public funds on private feasts. In response, the Senate could require him to host a public banquet for animals. Yes, animals. Goats, chickens, stray dogs, even pigs, gathered and placed around low wooden tables piled with food. The man was then made to serve them himself, wearing his best toga, silver ladle in hand. Spectators watched. They laughed. And while the animals devoured the meal with wild abandon, the host stood by, empty plate in hand, forbidden from tasting even a morsel. It was theater, plain and sharp. A reminder that food is not just pleasure, it is privilege. And Rome didn't take kindly to those who abused it. In quieter cases, a citizen might be sentenced to dietary exile, not banished from the city, but from its flavors. A list of forbidden foods was drawn up. No wine, no fish sauce, no spiced lentils, no imported figs. Bread, water, and plain barley would be their only fare for 30 days. A bland month, a tasteless reminder. Yet, as always with Rome, punishment could be reversed through ritual. Some gluttons, after their sentence, were required to publicly donate a cartload of grain or oil to the poor. If accepted by the crowd with cheers, the glutton's honor was said to be restored. If met with silence, they remained in culinary disgrace. Now, picture it. A man once dripping in wine and honey, now eating barley alone in a cold atrium. His long spoon tapping gently on a clay bowl, the scent of a neighbor's stew drifting through the window. No chains, no whips, just flavor, forbidden. So as you sink deeper into sleep, let your mind wander to the quiet corners of Roman kitchens and the strange spoons of justice. Let your own hunger fade as your body relaxes, warm and still. No banquets tonight, only dreams. Rome dines without judgment now. The clatter of long spoons fades now, and the animals have wandered off into the alleyways of memory. The banquet is over. But in Rome, the act of eating was not only about what passed over the tongue, it was also about what passed through the lips, in words. Speech at the Roman table was a serious matter. To speak too loudly, too crudely, or at the wrong moment could be seen as offensive, even sacrilegious, especially during ceremonial meals or feasts held to honor ancestors. In some circles, even laughter was regulated, considered a sign of weak control. And so, for those who broke the unspoken rules of Roman table conversation, there was a curious, quiet sentence: the silent feast. A person found guilty of speaking out of turn, whether by offending a guest, mocking a host, or interrupting a sacred toast, might be required to attend a public meal in full silence. Not only could they not speak, they were not permitted to react. No smiling, no frowning, no nodding. They were seated at a long table alongside other diners, their plate filled like everyone else's, their cup poured just the same, but they ate as if invisible. A small sign, often written in charcoal on a wooden slate, would sit beside their cup. Silentis sum. I am silent. It sounds peaceful. But in Rome's social world, it was deeply humiliating. Friends would whisper, strangers would stare. Jokes might be told to test their reaction. But the silent one was expected to sit motionless, chewing quietly, drinking without delight. If they smiled or sighed, the penalty would extend another day. This wasn't just punishment, it was training, a return to self-control. But sometimes, the inverse was true. A person who refused to speak in public, out of arrogance, protest, or defiance, could be sentenced to the talking punishment. This was not painful either, just awkward. The accused would be required to recite a list of daily announcements in the forum, things like market prices, festival dates, or temple hours. These were normally shouted by young boys hired for the task. But now, the silent offender would have to stand and speak for an hour, projecting their voice across the marble stones. Loud, clear, repetitive. They were not allowed to vary the words, and any mistake meant starting again. It was believed that forcing speech upon the proud reminded them that voice was not a luxury, but a service. And many who once refused to speak found themselves hoarse, tired, and red-faced by noon. Still others, particularly in the temples, faced a blend of both punishments. A priest who botched a sacred chant or mispronounced a divine name might be sentenced to 2 meals of silence and 2 hours of public reading from religious texts. The hope was not to embarrass, but to restore reverence. Rome valued ritual above all else, and the mouth was a sacred instrument. Now, picture the final scene. A long stone table beneath an awning, the sun casting soft shadows on clay cups and olives. One man sits perfectly still, his eyes forward, his breath calm. He does not speak. Across the square, another man reads aloud the opening of a farming calendar, his voice echoing through the forum. One in silence, one in speech, both learning, in Rome's peculiar way, the weight of words. Let this stillness settle around you now. No announcements here, no meals to attend, only the soft hush of history and the comfort of sleep. Close your eyes. The feast is over. Settle in once more as twilight deepens across the ancient city. The stars blink awake above Rome, and the gentle wind carries the scent of distant olive groves. Tonight, we wrap ourselves in fabric, not for warmth, but for understanding. For in the folds of Roman clothing, punishment often found its most curious expression. In the Rome of old, what you wore wasn't merely fashion, it was law. A man's tunic length, his sash color, the trim of a toga. They spoke louder than his words. Clothing showed rank, morality, status, and respectability. So when a citizen's behavior was judged improper, especially if it challenged their social station. Rome responded not with rope or stone, but with cloth. Let us begin with the tunic of dust. This punishment was reserved for those who betrayed humility, those who boasted of wealth too loudly, or displayed excessive luxury in public settings. A man might arrive at the baths wearing gold-threaded robes and leave wearing something quite different. The court, or sometimes the local magistrate, would issue a soft sentence. The offending individual must wear the tunic of dust for one full market week. It was a coarse, unwashed garment, dyed a pale gray-brown, with a faint scent of ash and soil. Stitched into the hem, often hidden, were words in Latin: "Memento terra es," remember you are dust. The tunic did not hurt. It did not chafe. But it marked its wearer as one who had flown too high and was now walking closer to the earth. Citizens who passed by would recognize the tunic immediately. Some would offer quiet nods, others might murmur jokes. But none would treat the wearer as an equal until the tunic came off, publicly in a quiet ceremony where the dust was shaken out and the person welcomed back into society. Stranger still was the cloak of contradiction. This was used for politicians or orators who had spoken passionately in favor of a policy and later acted against it. Rome hated hypocrisy, and while it rarely jailed men for it, it loved to dress them in irony. The cloak of contradiction was made of two halves. One dyed the deep red of senatorial dignity, the other a faded blue-gray associated with merchants or freedmen. The hara's wearer was required to walk through the forum for an afternoon, reading aloud their past statements, words they themselves had once shouted to crowds or scribbled into laws. It was a kind of costume, a walking confession. The idea wasn't to destroy the man, but to remind the people. Rome never forgot a speech, and a man who reversed his stance would find that memory stitched into the very fabric on his back. Then there were the color punishments. In certain temples, offenses against ritual, like speaking during a sacrifice or arriving late to a festival, were met with a silent mark. The offender was ordered to wear a sash of forbidden color. Bright yellow, often reserved for Vestal virgins, might be placed on a man's shoulder to signal impiety. Deep purple, reserved for emperors and high priests, might be worn in thin stripes by those who had dishonored the altar. These weren't dramatic punishments. They were whispers in fabric. But in a society where everyone noticed everything, they struck deeply. And like all Roman judgments, these textile sentences had rituals of conclusion. The tunic was burned at dawn. The cloak was folded and stored in the court archives. The sash was dropped into the Tiber, allowed to drift away with the sins it once declared. So now, dear listener, as your body softens into the stillness of sleep, imagine the rustle of dusty cloth on stone streets. Imagine a figure walking with quiet purpose, his robe a symbol, his steps a lesson. There are no cloak on you tonight. No color marks you. You are safe in your own silence. Let the fabric of dreams wrap gently around your mind. The garments of shame have been shed. The tunics folded, the cloaks burned. But Rome's strangest punishments were never just worn. They were embodied. In a world where presence meant everything, how one stood, sat, or walked was often as important as what one said. And when behavior drifted outside of Rome's intricate code of virtue and order, punishment took the form of position, still, subtle, and unforgettable. There was a posture known as the curvus, or the curved. This was not inflicted, but assigned. A young nobleman who mocked an elder, or a student who insulted a philosopher in debate, might be ordered by the court to adopt a posture of humility for one full day in public view. It was simple. Back slightly bowed, hands clasped in front, chin tucked. No straightening was allowed. The offender would go about daily tasks, buying bread, visiting baths, even dining at home, without breaking the curve. The position wasn't painful at first, but over hours, it grew awkward. Muscles stiffened, eyes lowered. Pride shrank beneath the weight of quiet submission. It was a reminder. Roman dignity must be earned by balance. Wisdom, not arrogance. Then there was the standing stone. In one of the oldest forums near the Aventine Hill, there stood a plain pillar of travertine marble. No inscription, no ornament, just a wide, flat stone base and a vertical post about the height of a man's shoulder. Those who had offended through interruption, especially in court or public ceremony, were sentenced to stand beside the stone for 2 hours, hands at their sides, back to the pillar, eyes forward. They were forbidden to speak or shift weight. They simply stood. This was called statio tacita, the silent standing. It was most often assigned to young men in training for law or oratory, those who had let ambition override etiquette. Rome valued speech, but not recklessness. And so they were made to endure 2 hours without a single word, to feel time in their legs, stillness in their spine. By the end, they often walked away quieter, slower, changed. But perhaps the strangest posture penalty was known as the kneel of shadows, reserved for night watchmen who fell asleep at their post or failed to report suspicious behavior. This punishment was carried out just before dawn. The guilty party would be taken to a wall where oil lamps were still burning low. They were to kneel, facing the wall, arms raised slightly to shoulder height, not touching the stone, but close enough to cast long, flickering shadows. The position was held for exactly 1/4 of a water clock's turn, about 30 minutes. It was silent, symbolic. The shadows reminded the watchman that even when no one sees you, the city still depends on your shape, your presence, your alertness. Passers-by rarely noticed these moments unless they knew what to look for. A figure bowed in a courtyard, a still man beside a plain stone, raised arms trembling in torchlight. These were Rome's quietest punishments, and some of its most lasting. And now, as your own body finds its position in bed, back relaxed, shoulders soft, hands still, you can let go of all posture. You are not being judged. You are not being watched. You are simply resting. No stone beneath you, no eyes upon you. Just the stillness that brings sleep. Let it hold you now. Rome has taught its lesson. Tomorrow, we'll wander again. Night deepens over the rooftops of the eternal city. The moon glides above the Tiber, its pale light slipping through the alleys and courtyards. We move now into a part of Roman justice that rarely left marks, but always left memory. A punishment not of pain, but of gesture. The Romans believed that the hands told the truth of a man's intentions. Gestures were not just habits. They were language. Orators were trained to move with precision, to shape arguments not just with words, but with fingers curled or extended, with palms raised or pointed. And so, when someone acted out of line, when they insulted a neighbor with a crude motion, or made an inappropriate signal during a solemn rite, the court responded with a punishment that fit the crime. They called it poena gestuum, the gesture penalty. The punishment was gentle but strange. The guilty party was required to wear a small wooden ring with a flat board attached just beneath the wrist. It prevented the hand from making common gestures. No pointing, no clenching, no expressive waving. It was worn on the dominant hand, tied at the forearm with cord, and made public movement awkward and stiff. It was usually assigned for 7 days. Not painful, but humbling. Worse still was the open hand march, given to those who had struck someone unlawfully in a public place. This sentence required the offender to walk slowly around the forum, with both hands held open and raised shoulder high, palms out, for one full rotation of the marketplace. It was assigned to all. These hands have done harm. They will not do so again. No chains, no guards, just a man walking. Arms held out like sails in the wind, the crowd parting quietly to let him pass. Then there were the bound fingers. This odd penalty was used mostly among poets, scribes, and public readers. Those who had written or spoken words deemed offensive or foolish. For 1 week, they were made to bind their index and middle fingers together with a soft red ribbon, a signal that they could not write or perform. It wasn't enforced by jailing or violence. The punishment relied entirely on public recognition. If someone saw the ribbon and handed the person a stylus or scroll, they too could be fined for aiding disrespect. One poet, in a surviving letter to a friend, joked that the bound fingers were worse than hunger. "I think with my hands," he wrote. "Now I must sit with silence and drink only from the cup of my regret." But not all gestures were shamed. Some were prescribed. Those who lied in court were sometimes made to make 3 public gestures of apology, bowing slightly while crossing their arms in a spiral over the chest, a symbol of twisting truth into clarity. It was a soft, choreographed motion performed in front of a temple, and many onlookers treated it more like ritual than ridicule. The goal wasn't always to shame, but to restore balance. After all, Rome believed in order above punishment. Discipline was to realign, not just break. So now, as you lie still, your own hands relaxed beside you, think of the many gestures you've made today. A wave, a point, a clasp, all free, all forgotten. No ribbons, no boards, no marching in shame, just rest. Let your fingers go soft. Let the day fall away. Rome's hands are quiet now. Yours can be too. We linger now in a softer realm of justice, where no lash strikes, no chains rattle. Only the gaze of one's own reflection. The Romans, you see, believed that the face told a story. It was a map of character, a display of honor. And when someone dishonored themselves or the gods, the face was not only where guilt was worn, it became the very place punishment was delivered. But not through pain, through reflection. One of the strangest Roman penalties, mentioned briefly in the writings of minor priests, was known as the mirror hours. This punishment was given mostly to young nobles who had acted with pride, insulted others with vanity, or refused to acknowledge fault in public. The sentence required them to sit for a set amount of time, usually an hour, in complete silence, facing a polished bronze mirror. No speaking, no fidgeting, no turning away. They were placed in a quiet room, sometimes within a temple's outer halls or in the corner of a court. A small stool, a plain wall, a reflective plate of burnished metal. The offender was to look upon their own expression without defense or distraction. One writer described the room as soft and echoless, where truth has no audience but the self. Some found the hour unbearable. not for the silence, but because of what the stillness brought. There, under no judgment but their own, many were said to weep softly or close their eyes, not from fatigue, but from the quiet ache of seeing oneself without excuse. There were other forms, too. The bronze frame, for example, was a square circlet worn on the head like a crown, holding a small mirror just before the eyes. This was reserved for those who falsely testified in public or slandered others with confidence. They were made to wear the frame for a morning, walking slowly along a route past temples and wells. Their reflection moved with them, always visible, always watching. It was a reminder that truth is not just what you say, but what you live with. But perhaps the gentlest of these image punishments was the vesture of reflection. It was used for people who had made false claims about their own achievements, exaggerated victories, faked honors, invented connections. These were not considered violent crimes, but dishonorable ones. For this, the guilty party was made to wear a robe stitched entirely with tiny bronze discs. The discs were not sharp, but slightly curved, just reflective enough to shimmer faintly as the person walked. They would walk through a plaza or along the city's edge, the light bouncing gently from their body. People didn't always know what the robe meant, but they noticed. It was quiet spectacle, a wearable echo of the lie once told. And when the walk was finished, the robe was returned to the temple, where it was hung on a wooden frame near a basin of water, left there, according to some, for others to see and reflect upon. So now, as you rest in your own quiet space, no mirror before you, no robe on your shoulders, breathe easily. There is no judgment in the stillness. Your face is at peace. Your story safe. Let go of the day's images. Let your breath grow slow. There are no mirror hours here, only dreams. Night continues its quiet sweep over the 7 hills. The lamps flicker lower, the air stills, and Rome, so obsessed with law and motion, prepares to teach its next strange lesson, not through pain or posture or fabric, but through time itself. In Roman life, time was sacred, measured not in minutes, but in moments. Dawn, midday, dusk. Water clocks and sundials rule the city like invisible magistrates. And so, it was only natural that some punishments would be designed not around action, but waiting. One of the most curious of these was the trial of the hourglass, or poena vitrae temporis. The accused, often a person who had lied under oath or manipulated events to their benefit, was required to sit in a small public booth with a glass timekeeper placed before them. Not a clock, not a dial, but an elegant hourglass, often crafted with fine sand and clear bronze-tinted glass. The sentence: remain seated until the sand stopped falling. No speaking, no movement, no distraction. But here was the catch. No one told them how long the hourglass would run. Some were set for 1 hour, others for 3, a few, incredibly, for nearly half a day. The uncertainty was part of the punishment. The person sat alone in the market, surrounded by the sounds of the city, while tiny grains of sand slid past one another in quiet judgment. People passed by. Some watched, others ignored. Time moved slowly, and so did the lesson. Those who endured the full hourglass without complaint were often released with no further sentence. But if they fidgeted, tried to rise early, or asked questions aloud, the glass was overturned again, and the wait began anew. It was a subtle test of character, a performance for no audience but time. In other cases, the punishment was mobile. Offenders might be given the march of hours, in which they were assigned a walking route through the city with a companion who carried a sand clock. At each quarter mark, the companion would ring a soft bell. The pace was slow, intentionally so. The idea wasn't exhaustion, it was endurance. A wrongdoer was to experience each part of the day as measured consequence. Morning heat, noon bustle, evening shadows, all under the gaze of time. The punishment often lasted one full day. By sunset, the sand had run through. The bell was struck once more, and the lesson complete. For more domestic crimes, such as lying within the family, breaking a promise to a spouse, or deceiving a business partner, a smaller punishment existed: the watcher's wait. Here, the offender sat on a simple stool with a water clock dripping nearby. Across from them sat the person they had wronged. Neither was allowed to speak until the vessel emptied completely. Some clocks were slow, very slow, and yet something in the silence did what words could not. Forgiveness often bloomed in those final drops, or at the very least, understanding. Rome knew how to use time, not just as currency, but as consequence. And now, dear listener, as you lie in stillness, you too are beneath time's gentle passing. But your clock tonight is not a punishment. It's a comfort. No hourglass watches you. No bell waits to ring. Only the soft ticking of sleep, drawing you deeper, quieter, safer. Let the sands of your own thoughts settle. You are beyond judgment now. The hourglass has emptied. The water clock stands, still, still. And yet Rome, ever inventive in its quiet ways, knew that time was not only felt in seconds. It was carried on the wind, whispered through the seasons. There were punishments not designed by the court, but shaped by the elements. Soft, strange, symbolic. Let us begin with the cold bench. Used mostly in the early Republic and later revived during the reign of Emperor Claudius. The cold bench was a penalty for those who ignored the needs of others, failing to help a neighbor, refusing food to the hungry, or walking past a plea without pause. The punishment was poetic. The offender was made to sit on a marble bench at dawn, facing away from the sun, for 2 full hours. The bench was kept deliberately shaded by a wall, and its surface was unheated, often chilled by the night's air. A small sign behind the sitter's head read, "In frigere mens est." In coldness, the mind is measured. The person could not speak, they could not rise. They were to sit and feel, not frostbite, but reminder, the physical sensation of indifference. As the city woke up around them, the cold slowly seeped into the bones. Passers-by rarely acknowledged the person. That was the point, to feel what they once allowed others to feel. Then there was the rain watch. In a time before umbrellas, Roman rain was not taken lightly. And so, when someone committed a minor but public offense, cheating in a market exchange, spreading small lies, or disrespecting local officials, they might be sentenced to observe the city during a storm. The offender was given a simple linen cloak and told to stand on a raised platform at the city's edge, just at the gate, just in view. When the clouds gathered and the storm began, they remained. Until the rain stopped. No cover, no speech, just presence. They were not struck or mocked. They were simply made visible. The Romans believed that water cleansed, but it also revealed. To be watched in the rain, to be seen enduring discomfort under the open sky, was to be brought back into balance with one's surroundings. And for those unable to wait in storms, a substitute existed. the seasonal walk, assigned mostly to those who mocked tradition or defied old customs. This sentence required a person to walk through the same path once per week for one season: spring, summer, autumn, or winter, depending on when the offense occurred. The walk was always quiet, always done at dawn, always witnessed silently by a clerk or guard. The hope was that the walker would begin to notice what they had forgotten: the rhythm of time, the pace of nature, the grace of patience. By the end of the season, some claimed they walked slower, softer, changed. These were not punishments of force. They were immersions, a return to the elements, as if the wind, the rain, and the chill of stone could restore what judgment alone could not. And now, as your own room lies quiet, as your walls hold back wind and sky, you can feel the gift the Romans rarely knew: comfort. No rain on your shoulders, no cold bench beneath you, just warmth, just rest. Let the season pass outside. Let time move on without you. Tonight, you are untouched. Let your thoughts wander again into the dreamlike folds of Rome's stranger corners, where even the most ordinary items held power, not in violence, but in quiet consequence. Tonight, we begin with a ladder. To most, it was just a tool, wood and rungs, a way up. But in Roman justice, particularly among the lower courts and guild halls, the ladder became something else entirely: a symbol of pride and of falling. This was the scala obliqua, or the slanted ladder, used for those who refused advice, especially young apprentices who disobeyed mentors or publicly mocked their elders. The punishment was simple and deeply symbolic. The offender was told to climb a wooden ladder that had been placed not against a wall, but on a slanting board, tilted sideways. It was stable, but odd, unnatural. At the top was a narrow platform just wide enough for the offender to sit. The sentence: stay on the platform for the length of a water clock's slow turn. Roughly 1 hour. They were not to speak, not to gesture, only to listen. Below, members of their guild or household stood and told stories. Stories of mistakes made, lessons learned, guidance once given and forgotten. The climber listened from above, not exalted but exposed, elevated only to realize the fragility of their perch. It was not dangerous. It was theatrical, designed to feel imbalanced, just enough to mirror the behavior that led them there. When the hour ended, the offender climbed down slowly and offered a short bow, sometimes to applause, sometimes to silence. More curious still was the bucket of echoes, a punishment handed out in religious schools or rhetorical academies. If a student mocked a teacher or shouted over others in debate, they would be given a small clay bucket worn on a cord around the neck. Inside the bucket was nothing, but the student was required to speak into it, softly, repeating the same phrase once every few minutes. Verba manent. Words remain. This was done while walking quietly around the outer courtyard of the school. The bucket would catch and soften the words, muffling them, bouncing the sound back into the ears of the speaker. It wasn't embarrassing. It was almost meditative. But to repeat a phrase so many times and hear it warped by one's own voice slowly became haunting, reflective, transformative. Another object punishment, far simpler, was the stone of promise. If a Roman made a public vow to donate grain, to fix a road, to help a neighbor, and failed to fulfill it, they were asked to carry a small, smooth stone in their sleeve for 10 days. Not a burden, not painful. Just present. Each time they reached into their robe or cloak, they would touch it, a reminder. At the end of the 10 days, they were to drop the stone in a public basin near a temple and recite their original vow aloud, fulfilled or not. The stone was not thrown. It was placed. This act, quiet and ceremonial, was seen as rebalancing the moral weight of their promise. The Romans understood that sometimes the most powerful judgments came not from guards or courts, but from repetition, from ritual, from reflection. So tonight, as your hands rest without stones, as no echo bounces back from your voice, know that your balance is already found. No ladders to climb, no promises to fear, just the soft platform of sleep beneath you, steady and kind. Let the bucket fall silent. Let the stone remain untouched. Let go. The streets of Rome grow quieter still. The markets are closed. The fountains splash only for the moon. And now we wander into a world of sound and its absence. The Romans did not just punish with what could be seen or touched. They knew that sound, like guilt, could linger in a room long after the act. So they crafted strange, thoughtful punishments using silence, rhythm, and the memory of noise. One such sentence was the tintinnabulum vacue, the bell of absence. This was not a large bell. It was no temple chime or warning clang. It was a small bronze pendant worn around the neck on a leather cord. It made almost no sound, just a faint tap when the wearer moved. This punishment was given to those who had neglected a duty, often a child who ignored an aging parent, or an official who failed to visit a widow or orphan in need. The bell did not mark shame loudly. It whispered it. The rules were strict. The offender had to wear it for 3 days and remain within earshot of others at all times. Each time the bell chimed, those nearby would know they were listening to someone who had once turned away from another's call. It was not mockery. It was memory. The most poetic version of this sentence came during religious festivals. One offender, a young man who had ignored his father's last request, was sentenced to carry the bell through the festival of Saturnalia. While others celebrated, he moved slowly, his steps soft, the bell's muted tap-tap-tap, a counter-rhythm to joy. Then there was the chamber of unheard words. This was a rare and solemn punishment, reserved for those who spread damaging lies, especially ones that led to fights or ruined reputations. The offender would be led into a small, circular room beneath a city hall. Its walls were curved inward, its ceiling high with perfect acoustics. A single oil lamp burned in the center. Inside, they were to stand and speak. But here was the strangeness. The words would bounce back softly, too faint to be understood, even by the speaker themselves. It was a chamber designed to remind the guilty that some words, once spoken, can never truly be recalled. They stretch, echo, shift, but never vanish. They were told to remain for a set number of minutes. No one listened. No one watched. They were alone, with the hollow feedback of their own voice. Some broke into tears. Others went silent. And then there was the broken flute, a quiet sentence for musicians who played mockingly during sacred rites. They were given a reed instrument with its mouthpiece sealed. For 1 week, they were allowed to play only that flute, in public or in practice. The notes would not come, only the breath rushing through, empty. A week of silence to atone for one misplaced sound. And still, through all of this, Rome rarely punished to destroy. These soft sentences were not meant to break a person, but to tune them again. like an instrument long out of key. Through small echoes, through quiet moments, through the return of rhythm. Now, as you lie in stillness, let no bell chime for you. Let no echo distort your words. Let the air remain soft around you, your breath the only rhythm. You are not in the chamber. You are not under the weight of silence. You are safe, and sleep is near. Let it come gently. We've walked so many quiet corridors now, beneath marble arches, past shadowed fountains, through temples and forums and strange little courts where silence held more power than shouting. And yet, Rome's most delicate punishments were reserved not for the body, but for the mind. Tonight, we begin with a punishment so subtle. It was handed out as a piece of paper. It was called the Somnium Libellis, the dream scroll. When someone committed a minor but meaningful transgression, mocking a ritual, breaking a promise, insulting an elder, they could be handed a small scroll, sealed with wax. Inside was a short passage written in poetic Latin, often anonymous, that described a dream. But this dream was not real. It was constructed, imagined justice. It might say something like, "Last night, I dreamed I stood in the forum, but no one saw me. I called out to my friend, and he walked away. My name echoed in marble, unanswered. I sat by the fountain and drank, but the water turned to dust." The scroll was not to be read aloud. It was to be read alone, in silence, and kept for 7 nights beneath the offender's pillow. Why? Because the punishment was not external. It was internal. The guilty were invited to carry the dream and to let it color their own sleep, to think about what it meant, to wonder what justice looked like when it came without force. If, after 7 nights, the person returned the scroll unopened, they were considered unchanged, and often faced a second, more direct sentence. But if they returned it opened, sometimes with a line added in their own hand, "I understand," or "Forgive me," the slate was wiped clean. The dream scroll was not about law, it was about conscience. More rare, but even more unusual, was the sentence of sleep. This was not punishment as much as intervention. A person who was caught in spirals of anger, disrespect, or public outbursts might be sent not to prison, but to a day of sleep. Truly, they would be excused from duties and told to lie in a shaded chamber, given plain food wrapped in soft wool and attended by a quiet guardian. The sentence was simple: rest. No speaking, no tasks, just stillness. And if dreams came, so be it. Romans believed that exhaustion of the spirit led to disorder, that chaos was often born of a restless mind. And so the sentence of sleep was a kind of medicine disguised as justice. No record of it was kept. No label followed the offender. The only requirement? Upon waking, they were to write one sentence. Just one. About what they remembered from the sleep. Some wrote of dreams, others wrote of silence. A few wrote nothing at all. But almost all returned, softer. And as this final chapter begins its gentle descent, you may see now that Rome's strangest punishments were not always cruel. They were stories, rituals, small invitations to return to balance. Just like this moment now. No dream scroll lies under your pillow. No sentence of sleep is required. You are here already, held by the stillness of the night, the quiet embrace of words long forgotten. Let sleep take you gently and without condition. The last page turns soon. We have wandered long, dear listener, through tunics and sandals, gestures and glances, ladders and mirrors, bells and benches. We have crossed time and silence, scent and stillness. And now, we arrive at the final circle of Rome's quiet justice, a place not made of stone, but of understanding. The Romans had many courts, many laws, many ways to correct behavior. But there was one space known not by its ruling power, but by its absence of it. It was called the Orbis Paenitentiae, the circle of reflection. This was not a legal structure. It was a practice. A small ring of stones, usually drawn in chalk or marked with pebbles, placed in a public space, sometimes a courtyard, sometimes beside a shrine. When all other punishments had failed, or when the offense was too subtle, too personal, too rooted in thought rather than action, a person might be invited to enter the circle and stay for one full cycle of the sun. From sunrise to sunset, no guard, no fence, no orders. The only rule, remain inside. Listen, watch, reflect. Food was brought, water was offered, but no one spoke to the person, and they were not to speak either. Some circles were empty fields, others surrounded statues or trees. A few were placed near rivers or aqueducts, moving water echoing the flow of hours. By the time the sun touched the far edge of the city, the person would rise and step out. No one clapped, no record was kept. But those who stayed the full day, who sat through light and wind and all the small noises of Rome, were often changed, not by force, but by perspective. For offenses of a different nature, particularly between two people, there was one final ritual, the forgiveness stone. When someone hurt another in a way that could not be reversed, a word spoken, a trust broken, they were sometimes told to offer a stone. It was not grand, not heavy, just one stone chosen by hand, carried to the home or doorstep of the person they wronged. It was placed there quietly, with no demand, no apology even, just the stone. If the other person wished, they could return it the next day. This time, placed on the doorstep of the one who had brought it. This act meant, we are even now. And if it was not returned, then the stone remained, and the question stayed open. Some stones sat for months. Some disappeared before dawn. Some were picked up and placed in fountains, dissolved into the wider world like old wounds left to drift away. These rituals were not famous. They were not part of the empire's power. But they were, in some ways, more lasting, because they invited choice, they taught patience, they recognized that punishment, to truly heal, must sometimes be quiet enough to be heard by the soul. And so we end here, not in spectacle, but in softness. The stories are told, the strange sentences have been served. The shadows of ancient Rome grow long and still. You are no longer wandering strange forums. You are safe in your own warm night, your breath calm, your body weightless. No circle surrounds you, no echo chases you, only rest. And if a stone waits by your door, you'll know what it means. Sleep now, sleeper of history. The bizarre, the forgotten, the silent, has kept you company through the dark. Rome forgives, and so do you. Good night.